Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And I'm Jennifer, one of the teachers prepared. What kind of things do we need to be prepared for? In today's focus, I'm waiting for the material to come back on the screen. Thank you. We're going to be hello, Giacomo. How are you? It's good to see you again today. I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the multimedia, but I'm going to keep you up to date as best as I can. In today's focus, we're going to be going over modal review, giving advice, and preparing for an occasion. And okay, now you can see on your screen that we've got the focus back on track. As I said, today's focus, we're going to be talking about, hi, Elena, how are you? Good to see you this afternoon. We're going to be going over our modal verbs and our semi-modals. We're going to practice giving advice. Now we know that when we give advice, there are several types of modal verbs and semi-modals that we can use. Can anyone remember what these modals and semi-modals are? And this is also going to help us to prepare. Hi, Teresa, how are you? Good to hear from you this afternoon. And this is going to help us to prepare for an occasion, because this focus today is talking about being prepared. Before we get started, can we think of what kind of events, what type of occasions we need to be prepared for? For example, students need to be prepared for an exam. There Hi, everybody. Are you still with me? I went offline for a second, but I'm back now. Let me ask Just one moment. Okay, on my end, it seems that I'm back online. Can you hear me now? Can you see the focus? So I hear a couple of people online. Right now, I have everything connected, and the clock is still ticking. Now you can hear me. And can you see the focus as well on the screen, Giacomo? Hi, Elena. Okay, please bear with me. I'm the only one connected now to the internet, so I'm pretty sure it should work from now on, okay? All right, in our focus activity, as I mentioned before, we're going over modal verbs and semi-modal verbs. We know that we use these modal verbs and semi-modals, especially when we're giving advice or warning. Okay, okay, here I am, that often to prepare for an exam. But what if we're not a student? Why do we need to prepare? We may need to prepare for a job interview. And that's one of the examples we're going to consider today. Let's take, for example, a job interview. What are some mistakes that you have made or that anyone can make if they're preparing for a job interview? What are certain things that we need to consider if we want to apply for a job? Let's think about our dress. What are we wearing? How are we speaking? And hi, Andrea, how are you? It's good to see you. Well, it's good to hear from you. I'm glad you could join us today. Welcome. We're talking about being prepared, Andrea. And there are many instances where we must be prepared. We said before that staff to prepare, and may need to prepare for a job interview. And that's what we're talking about now. What are some mistakes that some have made or you have made when you think about an old job interview? What are things we need to prepare when we go on a job interview? We mentioned before, we need to prepare our clothing. What are we wearing? We need to prepare our language. How are we going to speak? And we need to prepare also our scheduling so that we arrive on time. What are some mistakes some in the interview? And what effect does this have on your prospective employer? For example, if you're applying for a job in an important company, do you dress in a t-shirt and shorts and maybe athletic shoes? No, you want to dress smartly. You want to dress as if you were going to work. If you're applying for a job and the person says, okay, now you be here at 10 o'clock sharp. What time do you arrive at your job interview? Do you arrive at 10:30, 11 o'clock? Or maybe you say, well, you said to arrive at 10. I've seen very good, Teresa. We need to dress smart, but not too elegant. So we want to dress appropriately for the occasion. We don't want to be overdressed, but we don't want to be underdressed either. Have any of you made mistakes when you've gone on a job interview? Do you remember your first job interview? One mistake I made, and I often make, because I have difficulty in arriving on time. I'm always late. It doesn't matter how hard I try, I always arrive after the fact. So I remember my first job interview, and I arrived about 15 minutes late. And my prospective employer was not happy. Thank you, Jacopo. I tried to be there on time, even a bit earlier. And that's good advice. When you're going on a job interview, you should arrive earlier than your scheduled time. Because remember, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And a lot of times, that first impression determines whether or not we get the job. What happened to you, Elena? You went to have a coffee before the interview and you forgot your CB in the cafe. That's right, because once upon a time, I remember when we applied for a job, we went with our resume in our hands. There wasn't internet. We didn't send the resume before the interview. When we arrived, we had our resume and we were there in person. When you did the interview at Wells and a job, because honest, I didn't have any experience in waitressing. I had to lie. Well, I mean, that's advice too. I guess that goes with your speech and how you present yourself. We may not necessarily want to lie outright by saying, "Oh, I'm fabulous at this job," but it's good to be somewhere in the middle, to not tell a blatant lie, but not to be so honest that people think you have no experience whatsoever. Let's take a look at our next slide. We're going to read through the text, and then we're going to consider some phrasal verbs. When preparing for an interview, there are a few important things to remember. You should always go over potential interview questions and practice your answers. You ought to dress nicely. Unless you live in Hawaii, you had better not turn up to an interview in shorts and a t-shirt. It's also a good idea to keep up with recent events in the company you're applying to. By doing this, you will come across as a knowledgeable, intelligent candidate. Remember, first impressions are very important, so follow these simple steps to make sure you stand out from the crowd. Now, this is an excellent paragraph on what we should do and shouldn't do when we're preparing for an interview. And if you notice at the end of the text, it points out the importance of first impressions. So it gives us a list of steps that we can follow. And if we put them into practice, we'll have a better chance at getting the job we're applying for. Okay, does anyone have any questions about vocabulary in the text? Now we know that phrasal verbs are a preposition and a verb. Now the verb and the preposition, each of which have separate distinct meanings, but once we put them together, they have a whole new definition. Unfortunately, phrasal verbs need to be memorized so that we can use them. Because once we divide them, we can't translate them because they don't make any sense. Each phrasal verb has its own distinct meaning and definition. We're going to go through the text and find phrasal verbs that mean to arrive, to review, to give a certain impression, to be different, and to be up to date. As you're looking through the text, trying to find phrasal verbs that correspond with these definitions, just put them in our conversation box over to the side. If you see that someone has already responded to one of the definitions, then see if you can find another one. We said that phrasal verbs are made up of prepositions and verbs that each have their own meaning, but once they're put together, they have a new meaning all of their own. And fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of conversational English is made up of phrasal verbs. So they're very important to know. Let's start from the beginning of the text, which talks about preparing for a job interview. And in this text, it gives us examples of what to do and what not to do when we're applying for a job. Let's see if we can find phrasal verbs that mean these different things. We have to arrive, to review, to give a certain impression, to be different, be up to date. To arrive is to turn up. Thank you, Teresa. And notice here, to turn up, we have a preposition and a verb. Turn is the verb, up is the preposition. If we separate them, to turn means to revolve, and up is a direction. So we see that if we divide the phrasal verb, translate it, it no longer makes sense. But to turn up means to arrive. To review. Does anyone notice, can anyone find a phrasal verb in the text that means to review? Can't translate them from Italian back into English because then they don't make any sense. To go over, thank you, Elena. To review means to go over. It says here in our text that we should go over potential interview questions. So that means if you know that you're applying for a job, before you arrive at the interview, take your time to consider questions that they might ask you. They're going to ask you about your capabilities, about your past experience, possibly about why you want the job, and what you would do if you were given the job. So considering these questions before we arrive at the interview, when we respond, we'll sound confident and sure of ourselves, which is very important. Can anyone find text which means to give a certain impression? To come across an impression of yourself. Want to come eligible to go. Different today. Everybody say hello to my good friend Christine. She has difficulty in English, but I'm sure we can help her out. Thank you, Elena. To be different means to stand out. And when we apply for a job and we give our first and want to stand out, but in a good way, so that we can possibly get the job. I'm laughing, Christine. Because I love text phrasal verb. Because obviously, when we go on a job interview, we don't want to talk about things that are so dated that people often question how old we are. They're like, well, how old are you if you're talking about things from 10 years ago? So we want to be up to date. And in order to be up to date, we also need to be knowledgeable about the company that we're applying to. So it's a good idea to do research on your company, on your possible employer, so that you can give a good first impression. Because we said that we only get one chance to make a first impression. So it's important that we make the best possible first impression that we can. Does anybody have any ideas for how to be up to date? To date. I make sure that I know my well. And I also know a little bit, not about the private life of the people, to keep up with. Thank you, Elena. To keep up with. So it says here in our text, it's a good idea to keep up with recent events in the company you're applying to. By doing this, we'll come off as being knowledgeable. And this also ties back to, thank you, Giacomo, we need to keep up with the recent events. Because if we do, then we sound knowledgeable. And we said before that our speech and how we present ourselves is very important when we go on a job interview. Now, we've already found our phrasal verbs in the text, and we've connected them to the definition so we understand what they mean. Now, we have 5 sentences on our screen. We want to fill in the blanks with the appropriate phrasal verb. What are our phrasal verbs? Turn up, go over, come across as, stand out, and keep up with. Each of these phrasal verbs needs to go into the correct sentence. We have 5 sentences on the left, so we want to put our phrasal verbs in the sentences. So as you're considering what the possibilities are, just write down your answer and put it in our conversation box. Okay? If you see that someone has already responded to a sentence, see if you can find the answer to the next one. Okay, I realize that we have a delay here that's a little bit long, but I'll try to slow it down a little bit so that we can still stay in good contact. Oh, keep up with, I'm sorry. Here, a well-written CV will help you to stand out. Thank you, Teresa and Elena. Will help you to stand out from the other candidates. We said that it's important to stand out, but in a positive way, so that we make a good first impression. We don't want to be too strange or too bizarre that people don't want us to work for them, but we want to stand out in a good way. Let's take a look at number 2. You should never late for an interview, which is, thank you, Elena. You should never turn up late for an interview. This is advice that I should follow because I'm late everywhere I go. It doesn't matter. And I try. I really try. Let's take a look at number 3. You ought to, that's right, Elena, you should turn up on time for your interview and not forget your CV. It's very important. Number 3, you ought to the information on your CV to make sure it is correct and up to date. Because sometimes go over the information on your CV. Very good, Teresa, thank you. Because the CV, my original CV or resume when I started working it was a very nice resume, but I can't still use it today. I need to go over it and make sure everything is up to date. I need to go over my resume or CV. Thank you, Giacomo. That's exactly what we said. Let's take a look at sentence number. In order to be a good candidate, you must new developments in your industry. We said this is very important for sounding knowledgeable and confident when you apply for a job. Keep up with, very good. You must keep up with in your industry. And we know that nowadays, with all the computer progress and progress in technology, it's very important to keep up to date because otherwise we seem very old and expired. Let's take a look at our last sentence. Pay attention to your body language. Sit up straight. Make eye contact and smile. Don't fidget. This will help you to confident and focused. So eye contact is very important. And we need to smile. Very good, Giacomo. This will help you to come across as confident and focused. Fidget means to play with your hair. Or maybe some people like to shake their leg. Do physical movements that distract your listener. So fidgeting could also be to bite your fingernail or rubbing your eye. It's a repeated movement. That's a distraction. And it makes us look nervous and less confident. Very good, Andrea. Non stare mai fermi. If you're always in movement and you're always shaking or moving your hands, then you are distracting people from what you have to say. Shake, waggle. Sometimes out of nervousness, your hands will tremor, or maybe your voice will shake, which is why it's a good idea to take a deep breath and relax every time you go on a job interview, or even if you need to give a presentation. Let's go on to our next screen. These are some questions we want to consider. Now, if we were in a classroom together, we could consider these out loud and face to face. So I would like each of you to pick one question and consider it. If you see that someone responds to this question in our conversation box, see if you can respond to another one. And we're going to go over these questions little by little together. We mentioned before that if we want to stand out, which is our phrasal verb for to be different, what makes people stand out in an interview? We mentioned before at the beginning of the focus that there are things that we want to do to be prepared. Think about what you're wearing. Think about how you're speaking, the language that you're using. Also think about your body language. What are you doing with your hands? Where are you looking with your eyes? And how does your voice sound? We mentioned before how important it is to be prepared for an interview, to know about the people that you want to work for. Considering all these different aspects, how can we stand out if we're going on an interview? If you are in a position where you need to interview people to work for you, what makes a person stand out for you? Thank you, Giacomo. We need to be natural and not fake information. And we need to know about the company we're interviewing for. But as Ellen has said, we need to be ourselves. We don't want to go on an interview and be somebody else. We want to be ourselves, but the best us that we could be. Let's take a look at question 2. Have you ever turned up late for an important event? Now, I mentioned before that I'm chronically late. I show up late everywhere, and everyone who knows me knows I am late. So often they tell me a different time so that I get there on time. Think about an important event you might have turned up late for and what the results were. Was it important that you were late? Was it a negative thing or did they care? While you're thinking about that experience, we can consider question 3. Do you often go over possible questions before an interview? Think about the job interviews that you have been on. Did you go over the questions beforehand, or did you walk into the interview set improvise? What does it mean to improvise? Improvise means when you face a situation with no preparation and you basically take it naturally and see what happens. Not everyone is good at improvising. Would you recommend improvising on a job interview? Giacomo says he's never been late for a job interview, but I have for other kinds of meetings. I've applied for a lot of jobs, and I haven't. A few of them I managed to arrive on time. So it sounds like Giacomo and I have something in common. We don't always arrive on time for our meetings. Think of possible questions that they could ask you for an interview. Do you go over them before you arrive for the interview? I usually do. For any type of interview that I've had to go on, I've considered my previous experience and which experience I would emphasize and which experience I would kind of not eliminate, but downplay a little bit. Because if I'm applying for a certain type of job, then I want them to notice certain things immediately. We're not perfect. No, nobody's perfect, Giacomo. I try. I try to be perfect, but I haven't managed perfection yet. But it's in the workings. Teresa says, I'm hardly ever late, but I missed a plane once. And where were you going, Teresa? I hope it wasn't anywhere important. Elena says, I always go over possible questions. Excellent, Elena, and it's a very good advice to follow. Because if you go over the possible questions beforehand, as we said in the text, when you respond at a job interview, you come off as knowledgeable and confident. And that's exactly what we want. Teresa says, I try to prepare questions. Questions are usually the same. Yes, they are. And we found that the more job interviews we've been on, the more we hear similar questions. Not only for special events, also in everyday life. Elena, are you saying that you're late too? Are you late everywhere you go? We said that, yes, even though job interview questions are usually the same, I find now modern day job interviews are getting a little abstract. They like to give us circumstances or situations that are very, and they want to know what we would do in that hypothetical situation to see how good of a troubleshooter we are. What does it mean to be a troubleshooter? To see how we could handle expected situation, if it's a problem or not. You usually go over possible questions. Very good. Elena says, I'm often late, but for special events, I try to be early. Very good. So we understand the importance of being not just on time, but early. Which questions, Terry, do you hate? The abstract ones with the hypothetical situations? And yes, and if you were on a boat, but there are only 6 places on the boat and there are 7 people, who would you throw overboard? That's a common one too. It teaches people how to work in a group. Okay, our next question is it better to come across as excited and eager or quiet and confident? Now, this sounds like an opinion question, but consider also the interviews that you have been on, possible job have conducted if you're looking for an employee. If you were an animal, what animal would you be? Elena would be a lion. Not sure about the best answer. If I could be any animal at all, I would be a whale. Be one of the big blue whales at the bottom of the sea. That's what I would be. So this way, on some land, because under the water, I'd always be safe. So Elena would be a lion. I would be a whale. Now, a duck. All right, Teresa, I would like you to tell us why you would like to be a duck. A butterfly. That's a nice one too. I think if I weren't a whale, I might want to be a butterfly too. I might like to be a butterfly. But the thing with butterflies is that they have short lifespans and they die. They die fast. They die if it gets too cold. But whales can live for a long time, I think. I remember reading that once. They stay in families and they live for a long, long time. They are perfect. They can swim. They can fly. They have no enemies. Have no enemies? Ellen says, or an eagle. Okay, now, Elena, you have pretty exciting animals here. You would like to be a lion or an eagle. That's pretty important. Short but intense. Yes, Giacomo, that's definitely true. I don't know how intense the life of a whale is. It sounds a little slow and leisurely. But since I'm always late, that might be the kind of lifestyle that I need. I never considered a duck a perfect creature before. That's definitely something to remember. Thank you, Teresa. So as we're considering our imaginary animal lifestyles, do you think it's important? No, it's better to come across as excited and eager or quiet and confident? Elena says she's ferocious today. Are you sure you're not ferocious every day or just today, Elena? No, well, I don't think you're ferocious. I think you're determined and I think you're focused. And that's very, very, very important to be. So this way you know that people can't derail you from your direction. No, Giacomo, Elena's not scary. She's just she's very strong, determined professional woman. And I think that's a good lesson for a lot of women out there today. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for getting us back on track and into this focus. If we look too eager, it might seem fake. So we want to be earnestly eager, like you have to have this job, not because I'm poor and hungry and have no money, but because I would enjoy the possibility to grow professionally, to have this opportunity to work with you. So we don't want to be overly eager and excited. We want to be enthusiastic. It might seem, it's okay, Teresa. I know your finger got a little excited there and hit the S, but I understood it. If you look too eager, it might seem fake. That's okay. So we don't want to be too excited or too eager. We want to be moderately eager, believably eager and excited. What about being confident and quiet? Be careful that sometimes confidence can come across as being. So we want to be self-confident. We want to know that we want capabilities, but we want to be modest enough to recognize our limitations, which is important. So if someone asks you, can you do the job? You say, yes, I can do the job. But if there's something I don't know, I'll be sure to learn it and put it into practice. Let's consider briefly the last question before we move on. Why is it important to keep up with new developments in your industry? Now, a lot of us work in the educational sector, but maybe some of us work in a different sector altogether. Why is it important to keep up with new developments? Very good, Teresa. She says we want to be confident, but not arrogant. Because if we come across as being arrogant, it means that we won't take advice. And if we need help, we may not accept it. And that's a quality that not many employers want. They want you to be confident, but not arrogant to the point where you think you're better than other people. So now we're considering the importance of new developments in our industry, especially nowadays. Personally speaking, from my perspective, working in the educational sector, technology has become extremely important. Time where all we needed to do was clap our hands and sing a few songs, that's no longer enough. And we have a lot of tools at our disposal to make education more interesting, more stimulating, and more effective. Just consider what we're doing this afternoon. We're having a conversation, all of us, through speaking and video and writing, something that we couldn't have done 40 years ago. We would have had to have been in the same room. So is it important, or why is it important to keep up with new developments in our industry? Because it gives us the capability to do the best job that we can do in our sector. And that's what we want. As a teacher, I want to be the best teacher I can possibly be. And so learning how to do online English classes or using multimedia during certain lessons. Very good, Teresa. Teresa says that nowadays it's essential to be up to date in every sector. So regardless of where we work, regardless of what department we work in, we need to be all the time. And a lot of us need to take courses also to be up to date in our sector. All right, why don't we move along to the next slide, where we're going to consider our modal verbs and our semi-modals. At the beginning of the focus, Giacomo let us know what our modal verbs were. Do we remember what they are? Should, could. Our semi-modals: had better, ought to, mustn't, have got. And we have positive and negative ways for using these modals and semi-modals. Because if we want someone to do something, if we're giving them advice, then which language do we use? If we want someone to not do something, say, wait, that's not a good idea. You definitely don't want to do that. Then which language do we use? So we have a list of situations or a list of advice or warnings we can give the people. Extremely important. Things are quickly changing. Very good. Giacomo, can you still hear me? I'm still online. You better not ask about holidays. Very good. So Teresa gave us an example of something, of a negative or warning, something that we don't want the other person to do. So we want to now give an example for each of these possibilities, either giving advice or warning to the person that we're talking to. And as you come up with an example using your modal verb or semi-modal, just put it in the conversation box at the bottom of your screen. Okay. How should you dress for an interview? Something you had better not say. Teresa said you'd better not ask about the holidays. Something you don't have to bring to an interview. Something you ought to do. Thank you, Elena. Elena says you should dress appropriately for the job you are applying for. Very good. So Elena here has used the modal verb should, and we know that we use should when we are giving advice. You should do something. What's the difference between should and could? If we say could, well, you could dress appropriately, but you don't have to. Means we give more choice in the hands of the person that's listening to us. But if we say should, then we're definitely encouraging them to do what we say. Teresa says you mustn't turn up in shorts. Thank you, Teresa, because Teresa has used a modal verb and a phrasal verb. Her modal, you mustn't, means it's something you don't do. You cannot do it. Almost obligatory. And turn up means to arrive. So what Teresa has said, you mustn't turn up in shorts, means do not go to a job interview in shorts. That is a wrong decision. So in the few examples we've seen so far, we've seen an example of something we'd better not say, something we should do regarding our dress, and something we mustn't do also regarding the clothes that we wear. What's another type of semi-modal? Maybe too much. Not really, Teresa, because if someone is applying for a job as a CEO in a corporate bank and they show up for their interview wearing Bermuda shorts, or better yet, denim cutoffs, do you think they're going to get the job? I don't think they're going to get the job. Elena says, you should put your mobile in silent mode. Very good, especially because nowadays so many of us have mobile phones. We have the watches that also talk to us. Maybe we have our tablets in our bags. If we're on an interview, do we want all of a sudden our prospective employer to hear all these blings and beeps and rings because we've got a bag full of electronic devices? No. So we should put everything on silent mode. And flip-flops, very good. Unless you're applying for the job as a lifeguard. I tried to be a lifeguard once, a long, long time ago, and I showed up for the job in a bathing suit and shorts. And sunglasses, very good. So if you're applying for a job, you mustn't turn up in shorts. You mustn't turn up in flip-flops. And you mustn't turn up in sunglasses. Think of some things you have got to bring to an interview. So obviously we're going to have our telephone, but we want to put it in silent mode. You don't have to bring any presents to your interviewer. Very good. So thank you, Giacomo, because Giacomo has given us an example of don't have to. Because we know that if we say must, we're obliging someone to do something. If we say mustn't, we're telling someone, don't do that. Whatever you do, don't do that. If we say have to and must are about the same. But if we say you don't have to, it doesn't mean negative. You can or you can't. The choice is completely up to you. You don't have to bring presents to your interviewer. It might be nice depending on who your interviewer is if you want to bring something with you, but it's not necessary. You have got to bring some references. Very good, Teresa, because if you go on a job interview, you want to provide them with your history, with your job history. And those are references, people they can call and say, you know what? Is this really true about Teresa? Can she wait tables? Is she really a waitress? Presence to your interview is not bribery. Depending on where you're going, it could be a sign that you're extremely considerate or even knowledgeable about the person that is conducting. You should avoid yawning throughout the interview. Is this correct? Yes, it is, Elena. Instead of you should avoid yawning, you shouldn't yawn during the interview. Yes, you hate people yawning. Do people often yawn on interviews? I think that's terrible. I mean, or even if you have a yawn that comes up unexpectedly, you can cover your mouth a little bit. You shouldn't like yawn in the interviewer's face. I think that would be a little bit extreme. You've got to bring your CV and anything that could be interesting for your interviewer. Very good, Giacomo. So we want to bring our resume, our CV, because maybe we've already sent it via email, but the interviewer would like a paper copy in front of him or her while they're talking to you. Something else that might be interesting, depending on the job that you're applying for, you could bring a type of portfolio. For example, in the arts sector, you can bring a portfolio of previous works that you've done. So if someone says, are you really an artist? You can say, yes, I am. Look, I have a whole bag of artwork and I'm going to show you everything. And that's as valid as a CV. You bite your lips if a yawn comes up. Well, I think the key is to get enough rest the night before so that you don't find yourself yawning during an interview. Thank you, Giacomo. That's why you shouldn't bring anything, Terry. Okay, I'm back again. Something you should do before an interview. You should go over your questions. Something you mustn't do in an interview. You mustn't yawn. Something you ought to do ought is advice. This is just my own personal opinion. We ought to ask questions also to our interviewer. I know that I am impressed if someone comes for an interview and I am conducting the interview. I ask them questions about their experience, about why they would like the job, if they're working now, why are they looking for another job? But then if they have questions for me, then that shows that they're prepared, that they know about me, they know about the place that they're applying to, and it makes them look eager, but not too eager to get the job. It also makes them look confident, but also the movement, because if you're asking questions, that means that you know that you don't know everything. And so there's always room to improve. All right, let's move on to the next slide. In this slide here, we have some examples of people that are applying for jobs. We have this woman here who looks very, very happy. We have this man in the middle, very, very unhappy. And we have here who's still eating something, and it looks like he's got a stain on his tie. Looking at these three images, we want to think about clothing, attitude, appearance, and body language. And we want to give these three people advice using our modals and our semi-modals. We said that our semi-modals were ought to, don't have to, have got. That our modals are should, could, must, or mustn't. And keeping these modals and semi-modals in mind, we want to look at their attitude, which is conveyed through body language and posture. Their appearance. So are they clean? Are they dirty? Do they look tired? And we said that appearance and attitude is also conveyed through body language. Body language, we said, about making eye contact, speaking with confidence, and knowing the person that you have in front of you. Can anyone come up with any advice for the people that we have on the screen? Keeping in mind our modal verbs, our semi-modal verbs, can we give anyone advice? If we can come up with a piece of advice for each of these people, that'll take us to the end of our lesson for today. So we can start with the woman with the great hair. I love her hair. We can start with the woman with the great hair and all the flowers on her head. I'm not sure exactly where she's applying for a job, but it might also depend on the place where she's applying. For example, if she's applying at a club to be a singer or performer, this might be okay. If she's applying for a job as an actress at a theater, this presentation might work. But if she's applying for a job as a babysitter, or a librarian, should she apply for a job dressed like that? If she's applying for a job as a stylist, she looks great. Yes, she does. I mean, look at her nails, and she's got great flowers in her hair. She's got a lot of great hair. In fact, I wish I had that hair too. but her appearance might not be appropriate in all sectors. So do we have any advice for her at all? Let's take a look at the man in the middle who looks extremely unhappy. And if you notice, he's got a beer bottle leaning on his him any advice. For example, he has got to stop drinking and he has got to take a shower if he wants to be ready for his job interview. What about the man who it looks like he's got food on his tie? Can we give him any advice? He had better change his tie. Thank you, Teresa. He must get himself together. That means he's got to be prepared. She ought to look more professional. Thank you. Is that the woman in the front with the beautiful hair and the wonderful flowers? And Giacomo says about the man in the middle, I'm assuming this is the man in the middle, he has got to look more interested in the interview. I think, and as Giacomo says about the last man in the last picture here, he mustn't eat in front of him. And as I said, to change his tie. Teresa says it's also important he had better not eat before the interview. That's very good advice to follow, because depending on what you eat before an interview, it could have an effect on the interview itself. For example, if you decide you're going to eat French onion soup before a job interview, is that really the best thing to eat? Or if you're going to eat tuna salad, a big tuna salad sandwich before your job interview, and then you go into the job interview with onions and tuna on your breath. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for joining us today. Going to be wrapping it up really soon, and I'll see you again soon, Terry. Okay, have a great afternoon. So listen, everybody, in today's focus, we talked about being prepared. Most importantly, we talked about being prepared for a job interview. What are things that we need to remember being prepared? Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you, Teresa. We need to consider our clothing. What are you wearing? Your speech. What are you saying? And also your punctuality. You have to arrive on time. By giving this advice, we went over our modal verbs, our semi-modals and our regular modals, and we practiced giving advice. I want to thank you, everybody, for your patience this afternoon. We were a little rough in the beginning, but we ended up finishing our focus. So it was great to see everybody today. It was great to hear from everybody today. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I'll see you again soon. Okay, have a great day. Bye.